Hello everybody, and welcome to another edition of I Just Want to Use It. Tonight I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Camera Raw and 8-bit or 16-bit images. I'm going to show you how to set Camera Raw up to bring an image into Photoshop as a 16-bit image, or if you prefer to set it up as an 8-bit image. And I'm going to show you one of the reasons why I choose to work in 16-bit images. So what I have here is two images. One of them is a JPEG right here, and it's the same image right here shot in RAW. And what I've done, and what I would suggest you might want to do, is set your camera up as you're learning to shoot RAW and JPEG just for a few shots, and just play with it and just shoot RAW and JPEG. You can set your camera up so that it will take one JPEG and one RAW of each image. You can see here I have a JPEG right here, and there's a RAW image over there. There's a JPEG and a RAW, NEF. I'm shooting a Nikon, so the RAW format is NEF. And this will just, it'll give you both images to work with. You'll be able to play around with them. You'll be able to really see the difference between what you can do with a JPEG and what you can do with a RAW image. But here's a JPEG and a RAW, the very same image set up the way I just talked about. This RAW image has not been processed at all in Camera Raw, so they were both brought over just as they came out of the camera. Now I want you to see this right here. If we go to Image, Mode, and come over here, I can look right down here and it will tell me this image, the RAW image, is a 16-bit image. Now if I go back over here to this JPEG right here and I do the same thing, Image, Mode, and come down here, it tells me I have an 8-bit image. Okay, and what that refers to is actually just very simply the amount of data that is stored in that image, the amount of colors that are available, the amount of data that you have to manipulate and play with. Now, why is that important? Well, if you're preparing images for the internet, for the web, it probably isn't nearly as important. But if you're dealing with images that you're going to print with, especially images that have very smooth color gradations, this one does not so much. It has some jagged, sharp greens and some radical yellows and blacks in here with the butterflies. But if you were working with a fine art image where you were using gradients of shadow and light, you would definitely want to be working in a RAW image in a 16-bit format. Now I'm going to show you what happens here with the histogram and why this is important. This is the JPEG that we're looking at right here, and I'm just going to pull this little histogram out. Now the histogram is just a representation of all of your image data. Here you can see your different channels represented by your colors, different colors there. That's the JPEG. This is the RAW image. You can see they don't look much different. There's a little bit of difference you can see because the JPEG is processed in camera. It shifted a lot of your data over toward the darker side. So you can see you've got a lot of clipping right here. See how this the blue channel over here goes way off of the board over here. It's shoved all the way over here and it's clipped, whereas if you go to the RAW image, it's not. You have just a tiny bit of data loss in the dark channel right over here and the blue channel right here. So what happens when we come in here and we make some radical adjustments to an image? Well, what happens is as you process that, it shifts data around in those images. And in an 8-bit image, such as this JPEG over here, I'm just going to use brightness and contrast as an example. And I'm going to do an adjustment that I would probably never really make in the field. I'm going to take the brightness down to somewhere around 50, the contrast up to around 50. And look at what's happened to my histogram right here. See all of these bars in here? This represents all of these places where there's spaces in between. It represents data loss. See, this is before the adjustment, this is after the adjustment. And so you can see that we have lost image data in between all of these little bars. Okay, now let's go over here to our 16-bit image. We'll do the brightness and contrast. Once again, we'll make that same adjustment, somewhere around 50 and 50 in the contrast. Once again, you can see we get that same clipping, but watch when I refresh my histogram on this image. It comes back and there's almost no clipping. See, you've got just a tiny little bit of clipping in here. Watch what happens to the 8-bit image when I refresh my histogram. See, you still have a lot of data loss and clipping. So an 8-bit image will not handle radical adjustments nearly as well as a 16-bit image. And that's why I prefer to work with 16-bit images. Now, if your computer doesn't have a lot of RAM, if you don't have a fast processor, you may not be able to work with a 16-bit image. And so then you'll just have to work with 8-bit and live with what you got. You work with what you got, right? But if you can, it's always better to work in 16-bit, I think, 16-bit images. Now, you're going to find people that totally disagree with me. This is, Photoshop. There's a million opinions about how to use it and so on and so forth. What I'm doing is I'm telling you how I use it and what I think is best, what works best for me in my workflow. Now, one thing you will find with 16-bit images is that when you go to use some of your filters, in the 16-bit mode, they're grayed out. And so some of your filters won't work in 16-bit. So you make your color corrections where you need to make them. Then you come over here and you go over to image mode and you change it to 8 bits per channel. Come over to your filters and they should all be available. There's all of your filter gallery and everything that you can use. Okay, that just applied a halftone filter to it, which I don't really want, so we'll do Control Z. But that just gives you an idea about why I work with a 16-bit image. Now, how do I get Adobe Camera Raw to bring an image into Photoshop in 16-bit mode? Well, if you open Adobe Camera Raw, which is what I just did here, it's what you see in front of you on the screen right here, and you go right down here to the bottom, you'll see this little Adobe RGB 1998, and this will set up all of your workflow options for Camera Raw. Okay? And the one I just want to call your attention to here, we're not going to go over all of these today. You can do a couple things in here that are fairly important. You can set your color space, okay, and I happen to work in Adobe RGB. So depending on where you're going with your photos and how you're going to work, if you're going strictly to the web, maybe you want to work in sRGB. I typically work in Adobe RGB because it gives me a much wider color space. Some people swear by ProPhoto because it has the largest color space out there. Next to lab. But that's up to you, and that's something that you'll get into more later on as you learn more about Photoshop. But here's what I wanted to show you today. Right here, see where it says 16-bit channel? If you want to set Adobe Photoshop up, or Adobe Camera Raw, to bring your images into Photoshop as 16-bit, you just come over here, you click down here on this little dialog, right here, click on that once, it'll open this up, and chances are you'll be set to 8 bits per channel. Okay, take that, change it to 16-bit per channel, and say OK, and you will be opening up 16-bit images in Photoshop. You can always go back and change it if it doesn't work. You may also have your resolution set over here to 240. I know that's a fairly common setting. I've changed mine to 300. So once again, that's up to you. I just prefer to have 300 as a pretty standard print resolution, and that's what I keep mine at for all of my images, is 300 pixels per inch. So those are a couple things I would suggest you change. Color space to Adobe, resolution to 300, and 16-bit on your image depth if your computer can handle it. Okay, so try it, see how it works. If it doesn't work for you, if your computer's bogging down, if it's running too slow, go back in and change it to 8-bit. If you work in 8-bit images, it is absolutely not the end of the world. I think Scott Kelby, who is one of the premier Photoshop guys out there, only works in 8 bits. So as I said, it's personal preference. I just prefer working in 16-bit because I feel like I get better gradations on my colors and images. So that's my reason for working in 16-bit images. Hope you enjoyed it. Next week, I think that we will probably work on setting up a workspace, showing you how to set up a custom workspace so that you can get your toolbar, if you want it, from this side over to this side, which is what I did because I prefer to have everything right here where I can choose all my tools and have my palettes and everything right here in front of me all on one side. Then I'm not going back and forth across the board making all these moves and long stretches to grab tools and so on and so forth. It's all right here. All of your workspaces that come with Photoshop are right over here. You can create your own custom workspaces, and I'll show you how to do that in our next episode of I Just Want to Use It. Until then, keep shooting, keep playing, and have fun with Photoshop.